Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I've been talking to you about playing instruments, how to do it, how to count time, and this kind of thing. And I'm going to continue with that today. And I remember telling you that there's a remarkable similarity between the way that the woodwinds finger from one woodwind instrument to the other. The saxophones, the recorders, the flutes, there's lots of the notes that finger about the same. And I want to show that to you today. But first of all, I want to show you two saxophones which I brought in. And the first one I'm going to show you is this one right here. This is what's called a straight soprano sax. Not too unusual. You can buy them. They're not rare. And this one I've had for maybe 3 or 4 years. It's a really nice one. And as I told you before, woodwinds are complicated. You can press a key in one part of the instrument and keys close or open in another part of the instrument. So I'm going to press this key right here. It's just below what we call the G sharp key, which is right here. And if you look at the bottom of the instrument, the ones that open are on the lowest level. I don't know how well you're going to see that. This one right here is opening and closing, and I'm pressing it up here. Now you got to remember that woodwind instruments are complicated. They have rods, they have springs, they have cork, they have reeds. All kinds of things can go wrong with them. They are complicated, and I can remember when I first got this instrument, I was so happy to have it, and I was scheduled to do a solo on it, and I got to the place where I was doing the solo, and there was a spring out of place, a little tiny spring. I can see that spring, but you may not be able to see it. Very, very small. But it was out of position. And because one little tiny spring was out of position, this instrument was very, very hard to play. These smaller instruments are hard to play anyway. Just because an instrument is small doesn't make them easier. Well, I was practicing and I said, there's something wrong with this. I can't get it to play the way I usually get it to play. And so as I was going into, it was actually a church service, I'm kind of praying to myself, God, show me what's wrong with this. And all of a sudden, I saw it. I saw that spring. I saw that it was out of place. I knew what I had to do. I took a fingernail and I edged into where the spring is, which is very, very hard to do. It's so tiny. And I got the spring and put it right in a little notch where it was supposed to be that it had slipped out of. And then the instrument was fine. I went ahead, I played my solo. Nobody ever knew anything was wrong. And it was just a real quick fix. But these instruments do get really complicated. I'm showing you the back side of it now. All of these side keys for different notes. There are a series of 3 keys here, and you can take and put your hand where it's supposed to be and then just switch it and play these keys. I know I'd have my hand out of position now for it, but it's just something you can do, lots and lots of notes, and it is very, very complicated. It's not a very, very old instrument, but it is a nice instrument, and I like to play it, and it's a lot of fun. So I will put this down, and the other saxophone that I have brought with you, you can't get any cuter than this. This is a fully functioning saxophone. It has everything about it that every saxophone has. It plays any kind of music that any saxophone can play, but it's very, very old. It's quite rare. I've been told they're not made anymore, and I don't know whoever came up with the idea that we really need to have a saxophone that was this tiny, because you have all the keys on it except for one. On these keys in the back, on the side, I showed you 3. On the other instrument, this just has 2. Now, it doesn't mean it can't play. It could be that perhaps the instrument is just too small to get all the hardware in, to get that extra key, and that could be a part of the problem. The other thing is that instruments do change as time goes on. They get redesigned, and they actually change the techniques, and the technical parts of them do change as people build them. So it may be that it is so old, it's very, very old, that a new kind of key was not developed at the time that this was made. It doesn't matter because it can play everything. And you notice that it's a little harder to show you the keys because they don't have the white mother of pearl or the white plastic, whatever it is that the instrument would have. It's kind of gold, but it plays just like any instrument, but they're harder to play. These little instruments, especially these little saxophones, are really harder to play than full-size saxophone. I have about, I think about 7 saxophones in all. I've got these 2 sopranos. This is called the curved soprano. The other one I showed you is called the straight soprano. And I have a couple of altos. I have a tenor. I have an electronic saxophone. I have a bamboo saxophone. I have one that's so rare, it's called a C melody tenor. It's halfway the size between an alto and a tenor. It has the same little loop on the mouthpiece as a tenor would have, but it's only a little larger than an alto. They are so rare that a lot of professional saxophonists have never even seen them. And somebody came to me and said, I have something for you. You might really like it, Pat. I don't know whether it's worth anything or whether it's not worth anything. And he brought it in and he showed me this C melody, and I'd never seen one before. But it's a very, very valuable instrument. One of my friends had it restored for me. It's absolutely beautiful. But anyway, I can only carry so much, so I don't have that one in. But most people have never seen one, and it's just a beautiful instrument. So I have a lot of saxophones. That's my main instrument. I wanted to show you these 2, and I brought them in because I want to show you how similar the fingerings are between the instruments like recorders and other instruments like saxophones, flutes, and so forth. So that's why I brought them in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to take one of my recorders. The way that you finger a C scale, if you just want to look at my fingers here, if you can catch that, you play the C like this. It's not the top note, but it's the hole that's just second, and then you switch and you put that up and play the B, which is the next note down, C, B, and then you add A, G, F, E, D, and C. That's the whole scale. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, and C. Let me take my straight saxophone and show you how to play this C scale on the saxophone. And what it's going to be is C, B, A, G, F, E, D, whoops, I got to get my fingers right, F, E, D, C. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. The C is actually the second position down, followed by the B, followed by the A, G, F, E, D, and then C is the lowest one. And it's exactly the same. Now, what about the flute? We'll stick that guy there. The flute, if you were to play the C on the flute, you were to play it like this. That's the C. And then what you do, it's a little different than the saxophones and the recorders. You just put your finger down on the mechanism in back, and that gives you your B. And then it's exactly the same. That's the flute. The only difference is that you don't go flip-flopping between a second position to a first position. You use the first position for the C, you add the mechanism in the back, you know, it's actually an octave mechanism, and that gives you your B, and then you just add all your other notes, just exactly like the saxophone, just exactly like the recorder. It doesn't matter what kind of a saxophone, they all finger the same. And I thought if you could see it, especially if you could see it on the soprano sax, the straight soprano sax, because it has the whitish keys, the mother of pearl keys, or the plastic keys, whichever it has. And from that, you see, it's easier to see than if I take the other saxophone. I wanted to show them both to you because they're both sopranos. They're both in the key of C. The one that I have, the little curved soprano, is very, very rare. I've been told they don't make them anymore. You see them occasionally. I've wanted to have one forever, and I finally got one. But there is kind of a story behind this. My mother lived to be 91 years old, and she lived past the time that I had open heart surgery. I had open heart surgery. It was difficult surgery, and it wasn't just a quadruple bypass. They did a lot of other constructive things to my heart as well. There was a hole that had to be closed. There were various things. And when I got out of it, I recovered well. And the reason I recovered well, partly, is because I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. But at any rate, when I got out of it, I didn't have quite as much air as I usually would have. So I said to my mother, you know, I really need to have a saxophone that doesn't take so much air, something that's more lightweight. And I was thinking about a soprano, but also just another kind of a newer model, because the newer models aren't as heavy. So my mother wanted to buy me one as a gift, and she got sick and eventually passed on. But after she passed on, my sister and I were roaming around. I was home for that week anyway, and we went into a music store. And there it was hanging from the ceiling. We were looking at saxophones, she was looking at brass instruments. She plays brass as well as organ and piano. And we were just looking around, you know, filling up time, having lunch, and trying to make a happy day out of it. And I looked up to the ceiling. I don't know what led me to do that, but I just looked up to the ceiling, and there it was. It's hanging from the ceiling. And I said, "Sister," and that's what we often call each other. And I said, "Look at that." And I says, "I've wanted one of those. It looks to me like a curved soprano, and I've wanted one for a long time." And she looked at me and she said, "Buy it." And I said, "Okay." It cost a lot of money, let me tell you. This is a rare instrument. They don't come cheap. But at the time I had it, so I went up to the person behind the desk and I said, "I'd like to look at that saxophone." So they brought it down. I was scared to death they were going to drop it, but it was well secured. And I said, "You know, I think I'll buy it." He says, "Do you know how much it is?" "No, tell me how much it is." And he did. I mean, we're talking a lot of money. And I says, "Okay, I'll buy it." And he was like standing there in shock. "Are you sure?" I says, "Yeah, I want that saxophone. It's what I've wanted for quite a while." And so I really think, in a sense, my mother guided me in some way to see the saxophone. It really was in some way a gift from her. But at any rate, it's a very rare model, very nice model, very hard to play. I have played it. I've played solos on it, but it's very hard to play. The size of an instrument doesn't have anything to do with how hard it is or how easy it is to play. And I've had a lot of people ask me, you know, what is the easiest instrument to play? And I'm always taken back, because to me, it's not a case of I want to play an instrument, show me the simple one, and I can master it, and then I can play an instrument and say I play an instrument. That's not the way to go about it. You play an instrument because you love the instrument. I've always loved saxophones. I've always loved woodwinds, and my father was a brass player. He studied at the New England Conservatory of Music. He was a tremendous musician, and played at Tanglewood. He was just really something else. But he wanted brass. I knew from the beginning, when I was very young, that I wanted woodwinds. And so it's not unusual that I would be drawn to the saxophones, clarinets, flutes, oboes, bassoons, and so forth, which I do play. But this instrument was, I think, just very nice. I had a chance to buy it. I have instruments, they kind of find their way to me, sometimes without my even asking and there they are. People give them to me. A lot of them are rare. But this is how I got this particular instrument, and I thought it was interesting. I wanted something lightweight, and I got lightweight, because this does not weigh very much. It's very, very little. But it's very, very unusual. You do see them. People do play them, but they don't play, you don't see them very often. So I'm going to put this down. How would you learn? If you know the fingerings, you know the fingerings of the C, you know the fingerings, other fingerings, you know the fingerings, let's say, of the sharps and flats. I will show you those as we go along. The fingerings are very much like they are for the other instruments. Even the clarinet. Now, the clarinet, I can only carry so much, so I didn't bring one of the clarinets today. But the clarinets have 2 octaves, and each octave is in like a different key. So you really have to learn 2 sets of fingerings, a lower fingering for the lower register and another set of fingerings for a higher register. And if you play the octave key on a saxophone, you get the octave. You play a low G, you press the key, you get a high G. Not so with the clarinet. You get about 5 notes off. You're really up an octave, but 5 notes off from what you played in the lower register. So they are a lot more difficult to play. But as you're learning how to play them, and you're learning how to play the sharps and the flats, there is such a similarity that recorders are a good instrument to start on when you're learning other woodwinds, because the similarities are there. And I do love the recorders. They're good in the sense that you don't have to worry about rods, keys, pads, cork, and all of those things that you have to worry about on other instruments, other woodwind instruments, and you can just pick them up and play them. I used to tell a pastor that we had before he passed on, woodwinds are so simple. You pick them up, you put them in your mouth, and they play. He says, no, they don't. I've never been able to make them do it. It's simple. Pick it up, put it in your mouth, and play it. But the fingerings are similar. So how do you learn the fingerings? How do you learn it? You repeat. You play something. Like, for example, if I play, I gotta watch my time. If I play a G, how do I play a G sharp? This finger right here. That's exactly the way the flute's gonna do it. That's exactly the way the saxophone's gonna do it. Although, if you're playing in that lower register, you may wanna use these 2 fingers. Or if you're playing in the higher register, you may use just this 1 finger. Well, what happens, you can get bored. If you play and you practice and you repeat the fingerings, and that's what you have to do to play the notes. You have to repeat them long enough so that it's simple to you. It comes naturally, and there's not much to putting down 1 finger if you're going to play an F sharp, but you're going to get bored. And so what do you do to make it more spicy? You make it into a song or something like that. I continually have written songs for my students as they're learning different notes, because they're more interested if they are not just repeating a simple thing, but if they can make it into a song. So anyway, I created this little song to teach the F sharp. And I'm going to play it. There's no background tape to this. I'm just going to play it, and then I'll kind of dissect it for you, because I have a copy of it right here so that you can watch the copy as I'm playing it, and I'm not going to play it very fast. But we're starting off with a G, B, A, G, and then we're going to the F sharp, so it's going to be G, F sharp, and back and forth. So let me just try this. Now, isn't that better than just putting down 1 key? Now, I'm going to take it, I'm going to show some things to you about this piece, because you're learning more than just the F sharp. You start off and you have the key signature, which has an F sharp in it, so you know that you're playing that F sharp. You don't have to mark the F sharp every time it comes up, and it comes up a lot because I created this song for students to get practice in learning how to play that F sharp. You don't have to put any marks in it because they're in the key signature. It's in the key of 4/4. This is the treble clef. These are all eighth notes. This is an eighth rest. So at the same time that you're learning this simple little song, you're learning more about counting, you're learning more about playing eighth notes, whole notes, and so you would go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a hole there, so this is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and you play it as one note, even though it's 2 because it's held, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then you have that whole note D. You hold it to the first eighth notes of the next measure, so you're really playing it as 4 beats and a half a beat attached together, and then you continue going, and this is a quarter note, half note attached to another eighth note, so you get 1, 2, 3 and 4 and, although you start counting 1 here, and you go through that whole thing. You learn time signature, you learn key signature, you're learning counting with rest, and you're learning how to play the eighth notes, counting them in time and holding them, so that you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and in the end you've got a song. And if you're practicing, I always suggest that you start slow. Don't play it fast, and then gradually work up as you get more and more proficient. So I'm playing that fast, but you don't start off with it that fast. You start playing slowly. Now what I've done is I've recorded a bunch of kind of songs that I've created that basically are exercises in terms of showing people how to finger certain notes so that you'll be able to actually play music. And at the same time, it shows you when you have to slur, it shows you when to have to tongue so you can get the notes out clearly. I don't slur these notes. It wouldn't sound as good as tonguing them. And usually I slur to and tongue to. Well, we're coming toward the end of my time, so I'm going to continue with this next time, and we'll be playing different exercises, and when the recordings are ready, then I'll be doing it, and it'll sound like I'm playing a duet or even a trio with myself when I'm finished. So we will see you next time. Please join me next time.